The recorded history of Palestine recognizes it as a unified region with a distinct culture and character that can be traced back to 500 BC. Like any other part of the world, the region has been conquered and ruled by several different governors and empires throughout the course of its long history. But throughout its long history, Palestinian people have maintained their unique identity and way of life. These photos are from the early 1900s, when Palestine was a part of the Ottoman Empire. At the time, Palestine was a thriving nation with an active intellectual, artistic, and economic life. But during the early 1900s, the political movement, Zionism, ran extensive campaigns claiming that Palestine was a land without people, and that it was only natural to establish a Jewish state there, because Jews, on the other hand, are a people without a land. In 1914, Chaim Weizmann, who at the time was the president of the Zionist organization and later became the first president of Israel, refers to this period as follows.
In its initial stage, Zionism was conceived by its pioneers as a movement, wholly depending on mechanical factors. There is a country which happens to be called Palestine, a country without a people, and, on the other hand, there exists the Jewish people, and it has no country. What else is necessary then than to fit the gem into the ring, to unite this people with this country? The owners of the country must, therefore, be persuaded and convinced that this marriage is advantageous, not only for the Jewish people and for the country, but also for themselves.
The phrase, "a land without a people for a people without a land," was widely propagated, even though Palestine had an estimated population of 689,000 living in several major cities and hundreds of towns and villages. In 1914, Britain declared war on the Ottoman Empire. Zionists seized the opportunity and proposed to the British War Cabinet that supporting the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine would secure the cooperation of Jews during the war. In 1917, after 3 years of forceful lobbying, the British government issued a public declaration that came to be known as the Balfour Declaration. The declaration read,
His Majesty's government view with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object.
At the time, approximately 90% of the population of Palestine were Muslims and Christians. Within 1 month after the publication of the Balfour Declaration, British forces defeated the Ottoman forces and conquered most of Palestine. This marked the beginning of British rule in Palestine, which lasted until 1948. During these 3 decades, Britain continued its support for the Zionist project. Several British governors and officers stationed in Palestine were firm believers in evangelical Christian Zionism. The belief that the return of the Jews to the Holy Land and the establishment of a Jewish state there is in accord with the prophecy of the Old Testament and is a prerequisite for the second coming of Jesus. Leaflets containing the Balfour Declaration were widely circulated among the Jewish population of Europe. In some cases, they were literally airdropped over the Jewish communities, leading to increasing waves of Jewish migration to Palestine. On the first anniversary of the Balfour Declaration, the Zionist Commission organized a large celebratory parade in Jerusalem. 1 day later, a delegation from the Muslim Christian Association protested and submitted a petition signed by more than 100 notables to the British military governor. Over the following years, Zionist migrants in Palestine continued to celebrate Balfour Day as an annual holiday. On the other hand, the Palestinian Muslims and Christians held several rallies against the declaration and submitted several petitions and memorandums to the British government to express their opposition. 20 years passed with ever-increasing Jewish migration. Palestinians realized that their peaceful protests and petitions against the Balfour Declaration were passing unnoticed by the British governors of Palestine. With the looming threat of losing their land and way of life, Palestinians resorted to armed resistance and a revolt took place in 1936. In response, British forces organized, trained, and armed large groups of Zionist militias to suppress the revolt. In subsequent years, these Zionist militias were deployed and engaged in various acts of violence against Palestinians, and a decade later they were recognized to form the Israeli military. During the Palestinian revolt between 1936 and 1939, a common practice of the British Army was to take a few local Palestinians hostage and make them ride with the military envoys to prevent mine attacks and sniping incidents. Soldiers would tie the hostages to the bonnets of trucks or put them on small flatbeds on the front of trains. The hostages were told that if any one of them tried to run away, they would be shot. Arthur Lane, a Manchester Regiment private, recalled,
"When you'd finished your duty, you would come away. Nothing had happened, no bombs or anything. And the driver would switch his wheel back and make the truck waver, and the poor wog at the front would roll off into the deck. Well, if he was lucky, he'd get away with a broken leg. But if he was unlucky, the truck coming up behind would hit him. But nobody bothered to pick up the bits they were left. You know we were there. We were the masters. We were the bosses. And whatever we did was right. Well, you know you don't want him anymore. He's fulfilled his job."
This was a period of close military and intelligence collaboration between the British and the Zionists. Reuven Zaslani, who later became the first director of Mossad, was in continuous collaboration with the British in the suppression of the Palestinian revolt. In 1947, Britain announced its intent to terminate the mandate for Palestine and to put forth the question of the future of Palestine to the United Nations. The Zionists pressed hard to gain representation in the UN Special Committee on Palestine, UNSCOP, which they won. The Arab Higher Committee, on the other hand, refused to cooperate with this UN Special Committee on the grounds that this issue should be brought before an international court. So, not surprisingly, the partition plan that the UN Special Committee proposed immensely favored the Zionists, giving them about 56% of the Palestinian land, even though they only accounted for about 30% of the population. This proposal was then presented to the UN General Assembly, where it needed 2/3 of the vote to pass. Zionists intensely lobbied the White House to make sure the vote was secured. By this time, Zionist electoral pressure was on the rise in the United States, and President Truman was well aware of their influence. That is why the United States pressured other states, particularly smaller states like Liberia and Haiti, to vote for the proposed partition. Delegates of the countries that finally voted against the proposed partition, such as India and Cuba, later spoke out against the threats and pressures that they received from the US and Zionist lobbyists to change their vote. Yet these strong-arm tactics paid off, with the UN General Assembly passing the partition plan with a marginal vote. David Ben-Gurion, who later became the first Prime Minister of Israel, wrote the following in his famous 1937 letter.
Does the establishment of a Jewish state, in only part of Palestine, advance or retard the conversion of this country into a Jewish country? My assumption, which is why I am a fervent proponent of state, even though it is now linked to partition, is that a Jewish state on only part of the land is not the end, but the beginning. This is because this increase in possession is of consequence not only in itself, but because through it we increase our strength, and every increase in strength helps in the possession of the land as a whole. The establishment of a state, even if only on a portion of the land, is the maximal reinforcement of our strength at the present time, and a powerful boost to our historical endeavors to liberate the entire country.
In April 1948, when Palestine was still under British rule, there was a Palestinian village on the outskirts of Jerusalem called Deir Yassin, and it had a population of approximately 750. Since the villagers had little means to protect themselves, Deir Yassin agreed to a non-aggression pact with the Zionists. Nevertheless, 1 month after the pact, 3 Zionist paramilitary groups, Irgun, Lehi, and Haganah, conducted a joint operation coded Operation Unity and attacked the peaceful village. At 4:30 on Friday morning, Palestinians woke up to the sound of loudspeakers ordering them to leave the village. The unsuspecting residents went out of their homes to investigate the situation, and it was then that the massacre began. Irgun attacked the village from the southeast, Lehi attacked it from the east, and Haganah bombarded the village with mortars. The Zionists opened fire at whoever tried to escape the village, and then moved into the village and started their cleanup. They moved from one house to the other, raping women, slaughtering children, and killing whoever was inside with machine guns and knives. Whole families were lined up against the wall and executed. Pregnant women were bayoneted, and the bodies of children were mutilated. Money and jewelry were snatched from the bodies of victims, and other personal belongings were stolen before the houses were burnt. British interrogating officer, Deputy Inspector General Richard Catling, offered the following testimony.
On the 14th of April at 10 a.m., I visited Silwan village, accompanied by a doctor and a nurse from the government hospital in Jerusalem, and a member of the Arab Women's Union. We visited many houses in this village, in which approximately some 200 to 300 people from Deir Yassin village are housed. I interviewed many of the women folk in order to glean some information on any atrocities committed in Deir Yassin, but the majority of those women are very shy and reluctant to relate their experiences, especially in matters concerning sexual assault, and they need great coaxing before they will divulge any information. The recording of statement is hampered also by the hysterical state of the women, who often break down many times whilst the statement is being recorded. There is, however, no doubt that many sexual atrocities were committed by the attacking Jews. Many young schoolgirls were raped and later slaughtered. Old women were also molested. One story is current concerning a case in which a young girl was literally torn in two. Many infants were also butchered and killed. I also saw one old woman who gave her age as 104, who had been severally beaten about the head with rifle butts. Women had bracelets torn from their arms and rings from their fingers, and parts of some of the women's ears were severed in order to remove earrings.
The news of the massacre of Deir Yassin and the fear that it inspired in the Palestinian population was a major cause of the subsequent Palestinian exodus. The Zionist gangs went from one Palestinian village to another, ordering Palestinians to leave or meet the fate of Deir Yassin. They would issue their warnings across loudspeakers. The Jericho Road is still open. Fly from Jerusalem before you are killed like those in Deir Yassin. Those words were not empty threats. In subsequent months and years, Zionists committed several other massacres of unarmed Palestinian civilians. Menachem Begin, who later became the 6th Prime Minister of Israel, hailed the taking of Deir Yassin as a splendid act of conquest that would serve as a model for the future. In a note to his commanders, he wrote,
"Tell the soldiers, you have made history in Israel with your attack and your conquest. Continue thus until victory. As in Deir Yassin, so everywhere, we will attack and smite the enemy. God, God, thou hast chosen us for conquest."
The British governors of Palestine refused to intervene. They did not want to risk their own lives in the conflicts between Palestinians and Zionists. With the increase in atrocities, such as the massacre of Deir Yassin, the British forces gradually withdrew from Palestine and handed over control of most key areas, air bases, and ports to Zionist paramilitaries. Earlier, in 1948, Britain announced its intention to end its mandate in Palestine on May 14, 1948. On that day, the last British forces withdrew from Jerusalem. On the afternoon of the same day, the Zionist leadership, led by future Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion, declared the establishment of the State of Israel on Palestinian land. This is a brief history of how the entire nation of Palestine was wiped out and the settler colonial project of Israel came into existence. The tactics used to found modern Israel differs little from those of ISIS.